Beginning of January, 1st of January, actually.
Right, okay,
yes.
so you're virtually at a year now as well.
Yes.
How's it been? Tough job?
Well, it's been a very interesting year. I've traveled to 27 member states. I spoke to the leaders, prime ministers, presidents, finance ministers, to hear what their views are. And I saw there's a very aligned view in terms of the need to scale up investment, productive investment in the EU, to integrate capital markets in the EU, and to have a strong voice of Europe in the world.
Nadia, that's an aspiration, but putting meat on the bones is very difficult. Giving the EIB the firepower it wants, increasing your gearing, which I know you want as well, getting the Germans to adapt, if not change the Schuldenbremse as well, getting Europe to compete with IRA as well, getting Europe to listen not only to the Letta and Draghi reports, but start enacting them as well. I see the aspiration and the desire to grow investment domestically. I don't see the action yet. Is that what's frustrating you?
I'm not frustrated. I'm actually extremely inspired and motivated.
Okay, great.
Yeah, because I think the EIB has an important role to play in getting in motion those dynamics, mobilizing public and private investment to the benefit of Europe's citizens and also businesses, and a peaceful world around us. So what I see is a strong political momentum, and I hope that 2025 will be really a change in gear in that regard.
Before you were the president of the EIB, you were, of course, a politician as well. I don't know if you still consider yourself a politician. May I beg to differ with you about the strong political momentum at the moment? I see problems in France, problems in Germany. Even Giorgia Meloni, who's had a pretty good run as Prime Minister as well, has got enormous deficit problems as well. I don't see the political momentum at the moment, but please confirm to me why I'm wrong.
No, but actually you nailed it, because I was Vice President of Spain, I was Deputy Prime Minister, I was Finance Minister, responsible for economic policy in my country, which happens to have been recognized this very week by The Economist as the best performing economy. Okay, in 2020, it was the hardest hit country by the pandemic. So at the time, many people would have said, well, Spain is in dire straits, it's going to be very difficult, but we protected the economy thanks to Europe's support. We launched a massive reform and investment program, and now it is the best performing economy. And that, I think confirms when there's a will, there's a way, and there's strong determination to get out of these challenges and, succeed, in facing these challenges. Well, on the EIB side, I can tell you we are determined to be successful.
Yeah.
Nadia, let's talk about the other elephant in the room, and that is Donald Trump returning back to the White House, the question of NATO funding, the question of Ukraine funding. And there are a couple of options that are being floated around in Europe. One, of course, is the Defense Special Purpose Vehicle that would be administered by the EIB. The other is a more comprehensive solution that some are calling for. That would be the Defense Security and Resilience Bank, which would be more encompassing of the role. And then there's always the nuclear option, Eurobonds. Which one will it be? Which one does Europe need?
Well, first, I think that the relationship with our partners on the other side of the Atlantic is strategic, and I'm quite sure that we all see that there is benefit in working together and reinforcing security and defense in Europe and beyond, I would say. From the European Investment Bank point of view, and from day one, 1st of January, I saw very clearly we needed to step up our support to Europe's security and defense. This is what leaders have been telling me, and that's what we're doing. Only last week, we have launched a 1 billion euro program for SMEs in the supply chain of Europe's large security and defense contractors. And we are also investing a lot in Ukraine and supporting Europe's security. At the end of the day, that's peace in Europe. So I would say there are many ideas floating. Let's wait and see what the new government brings in Germany, also the new government in France. I'm sure there will be many debates and many things moving next year.
You made a very important point here, actually two important points, Germany and France. There's this political impasse in France. We're waiting for the snap elections in Germany. Until then, you can't really make a decision which option Europe is going to go for when it comes to the funding and the financing of defense. Do we have that time? Can we be that patient?
Well, actually, from the EIB's perspective, we are already stepping up our game. Since 1st of January, we have enlarged the scope of dual-use investments that we can finance. We expect to double our investments in security and defense next year. So I think there is a very strong political momentum and determination. I hope you will agree with me on this. And so things are moving ahead. It's just that there are some big political decisions that obviously need to wait for the new governments in these two countries at the heart of Europe.
And that does make sense. I want to come back to one of the points you made there, the dual-use mandate that you have. That means it is for civilians, but also for military. You cannot finance important armament directly. Do you feel hamstrung by that?
We're an investment bank. We're not a defense ministry. And so we can finance 99% of the needs when it comes to border protection, drones, space, cybersecurity, demining and decontamination, research. So the investments needs are huge, and we can really support a large part of those investments. And then we can leave part of the investment for defense ministries, which are best placed for that. Huh?
Nadia, which country or countries are the biggest barrier to the EIB being able to gear up?
No, I think they're all very supportive. We're quite
Even
confident.
Germany?
Even Germany. I mean, right now the things are progressing, and so we're quite confident that we will get there. And next year we will be able to have. We have just approved a strategic investment program of 95 billion euros for next year, and I'm quite confident that we will deliver.
So you don't think that Germany is a barrier to more common European issuance? Germany is a barrier to, well, actually, Europe's largest and arguably most important economy, investing more and getting Europe out of this malaise as well? Because I might be hearing from the wrong people then, and I'm certainly not anti-German, but it just seems to me that they don't want to see more issuance, they don't want to see more common spending, they don't want to see more gearing up from partners as well. They are worried about, of course, as they always are worried about, the debt situation.
Well, we need to strike the right balance. It's very clear, and you were discussing for the whole morning what markets, financial markets are the signal that they're giving, which I think is very important, is we need to put our house in order when it comes to fiscal stability and financial stability in Europe. So we need to strike the right balance, but I think everybody realizes right now that Europe needs to step up its investment, productive investment. That's what the Draghi report is saying. You mentioned it a moment ago. And we also need to deepen Europe's capital markets so that we can scale up productive and innovative companies in Europe, so that ideas, technologies and companies which are born in the EU can remain here.
I'm sure at some stage in the last decade we've spoken a lot about the CMU. But in terms of Europe and its defence as well, and of course the reason why we're all talking so much about Europe's defence is Ukraine. I don't know how this works out next. You don't know how this works out next as well. But is there a risk that Ukraine is forced into a compromise due to political reality of what the United States' next administration does, because Europe hasn't been able to step up its support for Kyiv and to keep it in the game, so to speak?
Well, last week we had the ECOFIN Ministers' Council, the Finance Ministers' Council, and I was impressed by the determination and the unanimous support for Ukraine, unwavering support for Ukraine. We are the main investment partner to Ukraine. From the European Investment Bank perspective, we are financing energy infrastructures, transport infrastructures, water management, schools, hospitals. We are really supporting Ukraine's government. We have been able to mobilize the proceeds from the Russian frozen assets also to support financially the Ukrainian government. So I think that the EU's determination to support Ukraine going forward is quite clear.
But everything you just mentioned was about helping, dare I say, a peacetime Ukraine. If it's a wartime Ukraine, these facilities, we know the vicious nightly assault that these infrastructure facilities are being hit by Russian drones, Russian missiles as well. You can't rebuild Ukraine while it is still suffering such devastating losses.
Well, we have to build resilience in the country. I am asked many times, why are you rebuilding bridges which will be bombed again? Well, because we need people to continue to live their lives if we want the country to resist, this very, very difficult situation. But, Europe has benefited from the proceeds and the dividends of peace for the last 80 years. So protecting peace in Europe and making sure that Ukraine remains a stable part of Europe and joins the European Union eventually is an important part of the priorities of the new European Commission and the European Parliament, and we need to succeed in this endeavour.
Sorry, just one more question from me on Ukraine then. If the price from Putin, one of the negotiating ideas from Putin is that Ukraine never joins NATO, is that acceptable?
Fortunately, I'm not at that negotiating table, and I will be very
you know better than I do, Nadia, that NATO and EU membership go have gone hand in hand for many former Soviet bloc countries, former Warsaw Pact nations, former countries under the influence of the Russians as well. NATO and EU membership have gone hand in hand for many of these countries.
But not for all. We have some member states which are not NATO members, so that's a fact, you know. But you will allow me not to get entangled in this discussion. I'm president of the European Investment Bank, so I'm dealing with finance and money and to support Europe's policy priorities. That's clear.
Yeah.
A flippant question for the end. Do we even need to worry about funding for Ukraine if Trump comes back and ends the war?
Well, I really see that it is to the benefit of the United States to have stable Europe and to have Ukraine prevailing, you know, in this conflict, and ensuring that the U.S. continues to stand as the guardian of peace and stability and democracies around the world. I think that is to the benefit of the U.S., so I really hope, you know, that that's the outcome we see at beginning of January. And I think we all hope also that the war, not only in Ukraine, also in the Middle East, these terrible conflicts, these terrible lives losses stop.
No, let me just, I'm going to sneak in one more question as well, because since we've got you, and I always love hearing from you as well. We don't want to have to choose between China and the United States, but I fear that actually that might be a challenge that's put on the table for Europe. Do you want to be closer to the US, or do you want to actually not back the US in its own travails and battles across the Pacific as well? Do you think Europe will potentially have to choose between closer links to China or closer links to the United States?
Well, the world is changing. The world order is changing. And obviously, there are emerging economies like China that we really have to consider. We cannot ignore, you know, this fact. But the European Union is a trade powerhouse, as was shown just last week with the signing of the agreement with Mercosur, taking the lead, you know, continuing to sign profitable win-win trade deals around the world and deepening our strategic partnerships. I think that's the way forward, a positive agenda, engaging with our partners around the world, and continuing to bring prosperity but also peace in Europe and beyond.
Can't believe it's been a year. Well, congratulations. Have a wonderful holiday period as well. And
I hope I'll be able to take some days off.
I hope so. Do you actually take your work? You don't look at your work phone on Christmas Day, do you?
Well, I do.
Oh,
Admit to, I should
Nadia.
not. But yeah, I'm always in these jobs which really require you to be connected all the time. But I'm sure that we will take some time off.
I'll be handing it to my wife.